Growing up in a world where brutality was normal, Uday Hussein didn't just inherit his father's authority, he twisted it into a reign of terror all his own. Soldiers, students, and even family members became victims of violence. He left a mark on an entire generation, and the fear still haunts the country today. Uday was born in Baghdad in June 1964, the first son of Saddam Hussein and his wife Sajida. From the very beginning, his life was wrapped in fear and violence. Saddam was in prison when Uday was born, already known as a ruthless political figure, not a family man. Stories later spread that when Uday was still a baby, some of his earliest toys were disarmed grenades lying around the house, a detail that says a lot about the world he was born into. As he grew older, he often accompanied his father to executions. These were not hidden from him or softened in any way. Uday watched men die while standing next to Saddam, learning at a very young age that power in Iraq did not come from respect, but from fear and blood. In the 1970s, Uday attended elite Al-Mansur School in Baghdad. His life there looked glamorous on the surface. He was driven to school in a silver Mercedes, surrounded by bodyguards and servants, while other children walked or took buses. He had private tutors and foreign teachers, including an English teacher from Britain, which is how he picked up a slight Yorkshire accent. Despite all this privilege, Uday was not a great student. Teachers said he struggled to focus and lacked discipline in class. Other students noticed something more disturbing. When Uday walked into a room, conversations stopped. One former classmate later said that girls would hide in bathrooms when he appeared, frightened by what they described as his hungry eyes, even at that young age. Fear followed him long before he held any real power. For all the luxury around him, Uday was growing up inside a lion's den. He deeply idolized his father and wanted his approval. But what he absorbed from Saddam was cruelty, not guidance. There were rumors that even as a toddler, he played with grenades out of curiosity, treating weapons like toys. By the time Uday reached his teenage years, Iraq was already locked in conflict, and war was becoming a normal part of daily life. Saddam made it clear that his sons were not meant to live normal lives. They were expected to grow into men who ruled, punished, and controlled. Uday briefly enrolled in medical studies, but quit after just 3 days. He then switched to engineering at Baghdad University, a path that sounded respectable, but meant little to him. He earned an engineering degree and even a doctorate, though many believe these titles were granted because of his last name, not his effort. School was never his real interest. Physically, Uday grew into a large and intimidating figure. By adulthood, he stood around 6 feet 6 inches tall, athletic and imposing. At home, he watched Saddam closely every day as his father rewarded loyalty and crushed opposition without hesitation. He saw officials rise overnight and disappear just as fast. He learned that mercy was weakness, and that brutality solved problems faster than words ever could. These were not distant lessons from history books. They were daily realities inside his own home. In 1984, Uday was only 20 years old when he was handed real power for the first time. Saddam made his eldest son the chairman of Iraq's Olympic Committee and the head of the National Football Federation. On paper, it sounded like a role meant to promote sports and national pride. In reality, it became one of the darkest chapters in Iraqi sports history. Uday walked into the job with confidence and cruelty mixed together. He treated athletes not as competitors, but as property. Losing a game was no longer just a disappointment. For many players, it became a direct threat to their lives. Teams that failed to win were dragged into a private prison hidden inside the Olympic complex itself, where they were beaten as punishment for poor performance. Uday turned torture into a system. He reportedly kept a personal torture scorecard for players, carefully writing down how many lashes or beatings each athlete deserved. Fear replaced training. Some players said Uday would call during halftime matches and threaten them directly, screaming that he would cut off their legs or feed them to dogs if they lost. These weren't empty threats. Athletes knew exactly what waited for them after the final whistle. One national champion later told friends that if he ever died suddenly, they should not be surprised, because everyone knew who would be responsible. Sports in Iraq stopped being about skill or teamwork. Under Uday Hussein, they became another place where pain and fear ruled. But athletes were only one group caught in Uday's reach. His violence followed him everywhere. In restaurants, nightclubs, or parties, a woman who caught his attention could simply disappear. Uday owned several so-called pleasure palaces, buildings that looked luxurious from the outside, decorated with fountains and erotic murals. Inside, however, they were places of horror. Hidden rooms were used as torture chambers. Girls were often abducted from the streets and held against their will. If they resisted or angered him in any way, Uday's guards would rape and beat them. One former aide later said Uday kept some women drugged, raped them repeatedly, recorded the assaults, and then used the footage to blackmail their families into silence. Fear extended beyond those walls. A driver who refused to move aside for Uday's car could be kidnapped and never seen again. If a family member crossed him, violence followed quickly. At one point, Uday even shot Saddam's own uncle in the leg, proving that not even blood ties offered protection. By then, his reputation was no longer a secret. He had become a public monster in the eyes of many Iraqis. His control expanded beyond sports. He took charge of media outlets, launching the daily newspaper Babil, and youth television stations designed to glorify his image and spread fear. He also helped form the Fedayeen Saddam militia, a loyal paramilitary force used to enforce obedience and crush dissent. People whispered that Uday was dangerous even by Saddam's standards, which said everything about how extreme he'd become. Yet Saddam still did not fully rein him in. Uday continued to party hard, drive expensive Ferraris through Baghdad, throw wild gatherings, and demand absolute loyalty from everyone around him. Still, as terrifying as this period was, it would soon be overshadowed by something even more shocking. In October 1988, Iraq was still surrounded by war and fragile political alliances. Saddam hosted a formal state banquet in Baghdad for Egypt's president, Hosni Mubarak, and his wife. The room was filled with foreign officials, diplomats, and high-ranking guests. Uday was there as well, drinking heavily as the night went on. At some point during the banquet, his attention locked onto a man standing near the head table. That man was Kamel Khana Gigio, Saddam's personal valet and food taster. Gigio had committed one act that Uday could never forgive. In 1986, he had helped introduce Saddam to Samira Shadbandar, who later became one of Saddam's wives. Uday saw this as a betrayal of his mother Sajida, and he carried that anger with him for years. That night, fueled by alcohol and rage, Uday snapped. In front of shocked guests and foreign leaders, he grabbed a metal club and attacked Gigio. He struck him again and again, beating him over the head until the valet collapsed onto the floor. The banquet turned into chaos. Hours later, Gigio died from his injuries. Journalists later described the incident as a massacre in miniature, a moment when the regime's violence exploded into public view. Even Saddam was stunned by what his son had done. For once, Uday had crossed a line that could not be ignored. Saddam briefly had him arrested and jailed for murder, a rare punishment for one of his sons. But Uday showed no remorse. He did not apologize. Witnesses said he told people around him that killing Gigio was his right. The sense of entitlement was absolute, and it horrified even those used to life under Saddam's rule. After the killing, Saddam was forced to act more decisively. He stripped Uday of his official titles and sent him out of Iraq, hoping distance would cool his behavior. Uday was sent to Switzerland, but the move solved nothing. He continued to fight, drink, and cause trouble across Europe. By 1990, Swiss authorities had enough and expelled him from the country. When Uday returned to Baghdad, Saddam delivered another punishment. He ordered Uday's prized collection of luxury cars burned, a symbolic act meant to humiliate him. More importantly, when Uday came home, he was no longer seen as the future ruler of Iraq. Saddam quietly shifted his favor to his calmer and more controlled son, Qusay. Uday had to get back his status. So in the early 1990s, when Iraq was under heavy international sanctions and Saddam's grip on power was no longer as secure as it had once been, Uday made his move. He took control of the Fedayeen Saddam, the force that had once answered directly to Saddam himself. With war in the air and the Gulf War approaching, Uday used this force to crush anyone he suspected of disloyalty. Soldiers, officers, and officials who hesitated or questioned orders were punished without mercy, often on Uday's direct command. Fear became his main tool of leadership. His brutality did not stop at enemies of the state. In 1995, when Saddam's two sons-in-law, Hussein Kamel and Saddam Kamel, defected to Jordan, it was seen as a deep betrayal. When they later returned to Iraq after promises of forgiveness, that promise turned out to be a lie. Uday was reportedly involved in arranging their deaths. The men were hunted down and executed, sending a clear message to everyone watching. Loyalty meant survival, and betrayal meant death, no matter how close you were to the family. As his power grew, so did his wealth and his instability. Uday built a criminal empire on top of Iraq's suffering. He opened secret bank accounts overseas and made millions by smuggling oil, cigarettes, and alcohol, all illegal under international sanctions. His palaces became symbols of excess in a starving country. Inside them were private zoos filled with wild animals, rooms stacked with gold-plated guns, massive collections of alcohol and drugs, and fleets of luxury cars. Some accounts say he owned as many as 1,300 expensive vehicles. But behind the luxury was horror. One hidden prison cell held Iraqi prisoners tied near German shepherd dogs, left there to be mauled or starved to death. Another torture site was hidden alongside the Tigris riverbank. Uday often used terror as a business strategy. Rivals disappeared suddenly, and later reappeared broken and tortured, if they reappeared at all. In private lectures, he even bragged about his cruelty, laughing while describing how he whipped people and broke them for pleasure. Despite his violent reputation, Uday continued to marry into powerful families, though none of these marriages lasted. In 1983, he married Nada, a woman from Saddam's elite inner circle. They had 2 sons, but within a few years, Nada fled, unable to endure his violence. In 1993, he married again, this time to a 13-year-old niece of Saddam in an arranged political match. The marriage collapsed in just 3 months when she ran away and accused Uday of beating her. Every woman close to him lived in fear. Even his servants weren't safe. One aide later said he was punished with beatings to the feet and forced to listen on the phone as victims screamed, simply because Uday enjoyed it. In December 1996, his violent life finally caught up with him. As evening fell over Baghdad, his red Porsche sped along Al-Mansur Street. Suddenly, gunmen opened fire. Around 50 bullets tore through the car, and 17 struck Uday. The attack was fast and brutal. He collapsed inside the vehicle, bleeding heavily. He survived, but the damage was permanent. 2 bullets remained lodged in his spine, leaving him crippled. From that moment on, he walked with a noticeable limp and often appeared in public using a cane or a wheelchair. This assassination attempt marked a turning point. Saddam, who had spent years excusing his son's madness, began to lose confidence in him. Quietly at first, then openly, Saddam shifted his trust to Qusay. By the year 2000, Saddam made it official and named Qusay his successor. For Uday, it was a devastating blow. The future he believed was his had been taken away. Friends later said that after the shooting, Uday became colder and more withdrawn. his cruelty turning inward as well as outward. Rumors spread that his injuries had left him impotent, humiliating him deeply. Uday ordered false stories about his strength and virility to be spread, but private doctors dismissed them as lies. His personal life continued to collapse. Still, he tried to live like the prince he once was. He and Qusay threw extravagant parties along the Tigris River, filling their nights with music, alcohol, and dozens of young women forced to attend. But paranoia had taken hold of him. He barricaded himself inside garages to protect his luxury cars from imagined enemies. He accused Qusay of stealing their father's love and favor. The brothers, once close, grew distant and suspicious of each other. By the age of 39, Uday was wounded and pushed aside, but he was still dangerous. He continued abducting young girls from universities and government ministries to satisfy his violent desires. A journalist later wrote that women from powerful families were routinely kidnapped for Uday's pleasure. Fathers who dared to protest were threatened with death. One former aide described a horrifying case involving a 14-year-old girl, the daughter of a governor, who was taken to a party, raped, and later released. By 2002, Uday's cruelty had become part of everyday life in Baghdad. It was whispered about in homes and feared in silence. Women avoided public places, terrified of crossing his path. A Lebanese beauty queen who met him years later said he seemed charming on the surface, never questioning the rumors surrounding him. But by then, it was far too late. The truth of who Uday was had already been carved deep into Iraq's memory. He had everything a dictator's son could want, yet Saddam Hussein denied him the crown. And in 2003, as war returned to Iraq, the man who had spent his life hunting others would soon find himself hunted instead. It was March of 2003 when coalition forces invaded Iraq, and everything Saddam had built began to fall apart. Bombs rained down on cities, military units collapsed, and revolts spread fast. The regime was breaking from the inside and the outside at the same time. As chaos took over Baghdad, Uday vanished from public view. The United States and Britain were hunting him aggressively. His face appeared as number 2 on the U.S. military's famous deck of cards target list, right near the top. A reward of $30 million was offered for information leading to him. For months, Uday managed to stay ahead of capture, moving through northern Iraq from one hiding place to another, relying on fear, loyalty, and family connections to survive. As Baghdad fell and Saddam's power collapsed, Uday's world burned around him. Yet even in desperation, his obsession with control did not fade. When he learned that American forces were closing in and that his properties might soon be seized, he ordered something extreme. Rather than let his prized possessions fall into foreign hands, Uday commanded his men set fire to around 1,000 of his own luxury cars. Flames swallowed vehicles that once symbolized his power and excess. It was a final act of rage and control, showing how far he'd fallen. By July 2003, Iraqi intelligence finally tracked Uday and his brother Qusay to the northern city of Mosul. The two were hiding inside a villa owned by a relative who had given them shelter. On July 22nd, U.S. forces surrounded the house. What followed was not an arrest, but a full-scale siege. American troops called for surrender, but none came. Heavy artillery and missiles were used, tearing through the walls and collapsing parts of the building. For nearly 4 hours, Uday and Qusay fought back, firing weapons from inside the shattered structure. It was a last stand fueled by fear, pride, and years of violence. Inside the house was Qusay's 14-year-old son Mustafa. During the fight, the boy picked up an AK-47 and fired at U.S. soldiers. He was killed by return fire. When the shooting finally stopped, American forces stormed what remained of the villa. Inside the ruins, they found both Uday and Qusay dead. Uday's body was later identified using dental records and DNA testing to confirm his identity. He was found completely bald, lying face down at the bottom of a stairwell. Saddam had finally lost his most violent son. He later paid tribute to Uday and Qusay, but across Iraq, reactions were mixed. Many people felt relieved that the man who had terrorized their lives was gone. Others felt sadness, not for Uday himself, but for what Iraq had become. Uday's life ended the same way it was lived, surrounded by gunfire and destruction. As his body was carried away, one truth stood out clearly. Saddam Hussein's bloodline would not continue through Uday. The crowd he believed was his destiny never reached him. Power slipped away to others, and the regime itself soon collapsed.